I started playing music because I wanted the opportunity to impact people in the way that my favorite music was already impacting me. That I remember that day so clearly because it's the day that my life changed. We had no idea what we were doing. I've never really felt like I've had a choice to do what I do. Second or third song, power goes out, and we're wondering what the fuck is happening. Stereotypical, like, eruption of crowd noise. And he straight up asked me, like, oh, so when are you gonna get a real job? Oh my God, it's Jack White. He's right there. Oh, it's James Taylor. Hey, what's up?
Hello and welcome back to the channel. Welcome to something very, very different. Well, yeah, it is very different. So for those of you that haven't seen my community posts, I've not really been doing a lot of the stuff I was doing last year, and I part of that was burnout, but part of that is also that I'm trying to sort of have a more broad portfolio for the general working life and what I want to go into. So I thought of this idea for a podcast where I could hone my interview skills, perhaps, and I thought I'd ask on some really sort of talented young-ish people who are in the arts because I think that is something really interesting. And the way I pitch this to people um, is that, you have all these like inspired, content podcasts, and, it's like how to make it in the film industry. And they're interviewing like Steven Spielberg, and you're just like, that's come on. So the idea for this podcast, and I don't know how long it's going to last. I've got at least two episodes planned, including this one. So if it does well, hopefully we can carry it on. But the idea around it is interviewing people who are in the arts, but at a sort of more ground level, and people who are balancing all these different facets of life between needing to work other jobs, mental health, you know, is it worth it to pursue your dreams? That kind of thing. And I just think it's a really interesting conversation as somebody who is a recent graduate in film and TV. Um, I thought it would be a really interesting sort of topic to hit on. And I thought of the perfect guest immediately who was not available. So I've ended up with Mr. Dylan Sevey, I believe it's pronounced. Thanks for coming on again. You were here for the Excitable Boy discussion, and this is your second appearance.
It's my second appearance, and let me tell you, I am an excitable boy to be here right now. See what I did
Ah,
there?
very clever.
Um, Man, you hit on something that I think is so important. It's like when you look at any given sport, a lot of times the best coaches are former players who, maybe were good, but it's like if you ask LeBron James to be a head coach, what advice is he going to give? Like, okay, well, first and foremost, you need to be a freakishly talented athlete who's better at everything than anyone. So, asking Steven Spielberg for his advice would also be among those same lines. So I think I'm a great um, person to ask advice of because I am helplessly unimpressive.
Yeah, and it's less sort of about advice, and I think it's more about sort of life experience and sort of just understanding that for me especially, I think it's important in this sort of scary sort of postgraduate world, and even people who aren't postgraduates but just want an in into whether it's the film and TV industry, whether it's any kind of the arts. But I think particularly music, just knowing that there are other people who are like having to make these sacrifices to try and just do what they want to do with their life, in this sort of capitalist hellscape we call the world. So, Dylan, without further ado, I would like you to introduce yourself, what you do creatively, and what you do for work and all that kind of stuff. So, floor is yours.
Well, hello, Tom. Hello, everybody out there watching. My name is Dylan Sevey. I am currently the drummer in a band called The Minx. We released an album last year called Creatures of Culture, which has been on many famous critics' year-end lists, including Joe Staggerwald of Taste Like Music, basically the Chris Gow of our generation. Um, and I've been playing with them full time for about 3 years now, I think, maybe 4 years now. Um, and I have played music professionally. Um, it's tough to say. I'm 32 years old now. I've been playing music since I was 8. I've been playing out since I was 15. And in my early 20s, I played, I couldn't even tell you how many shows around Rhode Island where I grew up. And then finally, when I was 25, I moved to Nashville, Tennessee when I got a gig playing with Ron Gallo. And so since 2016, I've been living in and around Nashville playing music. And then on top of that, I am a senior bookseller at a chain bookstore called Barnes and Noble. Do you have Barnes and Noble over in
I
Europe, or is
don't
that
think
just an
so.
American
I
chain?
think it's an
I,
American thing, yeah.
I think it's just an American chain. But six, 700 locations here, pretty legit. I work at the one in Hendersonville, Tennessee. I also work as a record store clerk at a independent record store in Nashville called Vinyl Tap. It is half record store, half bar, hence the name. And yes, we do answer all of our phone calls by saying this is Vinyl Tap. Um, so I do those things, and throughout my life, I've done any number of different jobs and side hustles. I tell people that I have 3 jobs because playing music professionally is work. It is a job, and I think that as creatives, we tend to get demeaned in so many other ways, unintentionally. Like, even just saying like, "Well, what do you do creatively?" and then like, "What do you do for work?" It's like, well, I work all the time by, setting up a bunch of equipment, playing said equipment, traveling to the place and putting in hours, years worth of practice so I can do those things. And um, so anyway, that's what I do for work.
Yeah, sorry for contributing to that by asking you what you do creatively and what you also do for your
No,
real
it's
jobs,
fine.
you
It
know?
just
Uh,
you don't take me seriously. You don't take yourself seriously, and you're a bad person. It just is what it is. So.
yeah, you'll get used to this if none of you have seen Dylan before. He's a jackass. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting conversation to have around that. I think, you're quite a modest person, as much as I hate to admit it. You are a you are, like you sort of alluded to, you are a touring musician. It's not like your band are like just, you know, playing a gig here and there. It's like a proper commitment. And you know, you do have people online who have discovered your music, a lot of which through the Taste Like Music server. I believe a lot of those rated music ratings are from there, very positive ones, I should say. And everyone should go check out Creatures of Culture, not Creatures of Comfort, because I always think it's Creature Comforts, the old British program. Yeah. But it's a great album and you should all check it out. That said,
Thank you.
listen to this video first. I'm going to open up first off with I've given Dylan a lot of these questions just to be clear beforehand, but I will probably sneak in some curveballs in there as well.
Please do.
When did you know that you wanted to be a musician? Was there like, I guess I should rephrase it. When did you know that was what you wanted to do, like as a career? Because was there a light bulb moment, or did you just sort of like, because you have been with music for a lot longer than I have, because I only really got into music when I was like 15, 16. Um,
Mhm.
you were at a very young age, knew that you loved music. When was there a moment, or was it just that you'd known it as a part of your life for so long that it just felt natural?
It's tough to pinpoint a particular moment. When you're a kid, um, every kid goes through phases. I think before the age of 8 years old, at any given point, I wanted to be a paleontologist or a professional basketball player or the president of the United States, which God help us all if that actually happened. Um, and
Couldn't be
so it's
much
one of those
worse than
things.
the two that are going to be running for this year.
And welcome to Tom and I's new geopolitics podcast. But it is kind of interesting because I I really fell in love with music and started playing music when I was 8 years old. Um, but it's not like I like gained all of this insane awareness to say everything that I've ever wanted to do before this point was just a childish fantasy, and I am now firmly in the like, no, I was 8 years old and this was as cool to me as it was, trying to be Larry Bird or, the guy that found the Titanic or anything like that. But what I do remember is that when I started playing, I almost immediately I had notebooks where I would be writing down like, all my friends' names from school, like, well, these guys are gonna be in my band with me, and this is the instrument they're gonna play. I didn't consult with these people. I just, I assumed, well, obviously they'll want to do this because anyone who's anyone would want to be in a band with me. Um, I think the first fake band name that I had was the Grasshoppers because the Beatles and eventually the Crickets. I'm like, oh, this makes sense. But I was telling someone recently that it took me years to consciously recognize this, but I think subconsciously from the get-go, I started playing music because I wanted the opportunity to impact people in the way that my favorite music was already impacting me. Um, like I remember, it's this year it's going to be 25 years, but I remember vividly sitting cross-legged on my old bedroom floor listening to the White Album and, going through the booklet and reading the lyrics and seeing the pictures. And that I remember that day so clearly because it's the day that my life changed. And um, it probably took me into my late teens or early 20s to realize that that was one of the subconscious reasons. Like I never thought like, oh, well, I want to do this because I want to be famous and I want all the babes and drugs, because we all know that at 8 years old, you're really into the babes and drugs. Um, so yeah, I don't think there was like I'm sure there was a conscientious decision at 8 years old of this is what I'm gonna do now, but in terms of like actually committing to that and understanding what that meant, I think it was much more of a subconscious decision, like not even really a decision, it just happened. Like I heard this music and I knew deep down in my soul, however many different reincarnated souls, exist within me knew this is the path we are taking. And I'm mostly grateful for it.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I had a very similar experience the first time I heard the White Album. Um, it was
Yeah.
like, what the hell? This is the best thing, you know? Um, but yeah, it's interesting. I feel like that is sort of like a starting off point. I want to ask who is your biggest inspiration, but also like who was your first inspiration? I guess that might be two answers in terms of wanting to pursue music.
It's difficult, I think, to not bring it back to the Beatles, which, you know, No one's ever said that before, right? Um, but I grew up with music. I mean, both of my parents are enormous music fans, listeners, devotees. I am named after Bob Dylan. My sister Erica is named after Eric Clapton, and my dad originally wanted to name us both, after Allman Brothers related people and songs. Um, like that was in the house. And I still have my very first mix CD that I made before my big awakening. And I vividly remember like it was a big deal. We had this new computer that had this thing called a disk drive where you could make like all these mixed tapes that people used to make. All of a sudden, you could make those on CD, which maybe some of our younger viewers don't know what a CD is, a compact disc. And that in and of itself makes me want to die. But um, I loved the Rugrats movie soundtrack. I loved All Star by Smash Mouth. And I there was some stuff I knew I was named after Bob Dylan, and for whatever reason, I don't know how my dad has the entire Bob Dylan collection on CD. Maybe it's just because he knew I'd find them funny. My introduction to Bob Dylan was Yay Heavy and a Bottle of Bread. And Please, Mrs. Henry, the silly stuff from the basement tapes. I don't think my dad was trying to show me It's All Right, Mom, Only Bleeding when I was 6 years old, because I wouldn't have gotten it. Um, I fell asleep to Harvest Moon by Neil Young every night. I knew who John Fogerty was. I knew who Eric Clapton was because my sister was named after him. Um, but it was probably a very distinct decision by my dad. I told him, "Hey, I want to make another mix CD." And he knew that like, well, my kid doesn't know the difference between Neil Young and NSYNC. He thinks that they are both very valid, which now I've come back around to saying they probably are, but another story for another time. And he gave me the White Album and he gave me Nirvana's MTV Unplugged. And like I said, that's the day. And I don't remember if it was later that same day or if it was the next day. I was setting up pots and pans in the kitchen. And I didn't have any um gauge on the fact that I would look so similar to Ringo when I grew up. It had nothing to do with that connection. But probably just because it made sense to me. I knew there wasn't a guitar in the house, but I could hear that drums were playing. And that is what started it all. And I loved the Nirvana record. I would still venture to say that Nirvana's MTV Unplugged is a top 20 all-time record for me, both in terms of its importance to my life and my enjoyment of it. But the Beatles, it opened this whole new thing because also, even though I started drumming, I also immediately started writing lyrics and melodies, and I had these songs, and for years I would just sing them, or maybe I would play and sing them. I probably wasn't till I was 14 that I actually picked up a guitar. Um, but it was all them, it was the songs, it was the melodies, it was all the soundscapes. It reached me like nothing else ever had, and all these years later, it's exactly the same. My Beatles fandom and nerddom is it's a problem in some ways.
Yeah, I can confirm that. Yeah. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. Um, what was your first concert like in terms of playing it? So concert's probably like gig, you know. What was the first time that was like? Because I have released music and so not to the same level that you have, of course, just sort of like messing around in my room. But I've played one open mic and my legs wouldn't stop shaking the entire time. So I'm just picturing like when there's actual pressure and people are there to actually like see you, uh, what that must be like. So what was your first sort of experience of that like?
Oh, Tom, you have asked a wonderful question. Everything I'm about to tell you is 100% unequivocally true. I am not making any of this up. My first concert was with my middle school band called the Angry Dishwashers, and we played a show in the backyard of my friend Molly Sullivan's house, who actually I still live right outside Nashville, but I'm back home in Rhode Island right now. And I saw my friend Molly Sullivan last night, and she's engaged to literally my oldest friend. So, this is all something cosmically is happening right now. But I played in her backyard with the Angry Dishwashers, and we had no idea what we were doing. I mean, I I knew how to play drums. I was 14 years old, I think, at this show, and I'd been playing since I was 8, and I think, you know, for someone who'd been playing for 6 years, I was pretty good. Um, the guitarist and bassist in the band both eventually grew into very good musicians in their own right, but at the time, I think they would both admit their skill levels was not extremely high. Um, and I remember we videotaped the concert probably somewhere in some box. There's still a little tape of that first concert that I ever played. And it sounded like what you would expect a bunch of 14-year-olds who go by the Angry Dishwashers to sound like. And I think I remember at the time, very typical to what my life is still like. At the time, I was so preoccupied with making sure that everything was going right that I don't know if I was able to take in the fact that it was happening. I also think I knew, like, deep down, like, this isn't great because I I've at this point have been listening to the Beatles for 6 years nonstop, and I have gotten into the Stones and Zeppelin and Dylan and Petty and Springsteen and God, like literally hundreds of other groups. I knew what professional, great music sounded like, and I knew that we didn't sound like that. But there was only so much else we couldn't fast forward time, to make us these incredible musicians. Um, but it I still remember what it was like and seeing people in front of me listening, and I think I remember one of my friends laughing when the first song started, um, which maybe I think I clocked at the time of, oh, that's not good. Like, I love funny. I've been a Weird Al devotee since I was 8 years old as well, but this guy isn't laughing like in a way that he should be laughing. So, right off the bat, it was my first taste of immediate criticism. Uh, as as well as having to deal with the pressure of making sure that individually you're doing well, that collectively you're doing everything well, knowing there's people in front of you, making sure that the sound is coming out right, and um it's you know what it's like. It's like you're getting thrown into the fire. Once you start, like, that's it. Like, oh shit. Like, I've considered this possibility for years. I've been dreaming about this possibility for years. And now, train's rolling, and it's not gonna stop. And um it was absolutely wild. Um
Yeah, you
do
really threw
we
yourself into the deep end with that, like at 14 is wild. Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of have to throw yourself in the fire. And like I said, to a certain point, if I'd spent up to that point 6 years saying these are going to be the people in my band, and these are the songs we're going to play, and this and that and this and that, and then it was finally happening. I mean, technically, you have a choice whether to take that step or whether not to take that step, but I don't feel like I had a choice. I've never really felt like I've had a choice to do what I do, because it's been obvious to me from 8 years old. This is what I do. And And I'm glad I did. You know, I'm glad my first show was with the Anger Dishwashers. My second show went 1,000 times better, and was infinitely more exhilarating. But I'm very, very pleased with how that went. And you know, I take a lot of pride that I was able to do that at 14, you know, regardless of the fact that it sounded like complete garbage. Like it didn't matter. Like I still had the guts to do it. Like even to this day, like there's a there's a phrase my friend once used. I was playing with him and I was like, man, like I'm pretty sure I've got this harmony that I'm supposed to be singing, but like sometimes I have a problem, you know, finding that first note. And he turned to me, he said, "Wrong and strong, brother." And I was like, and I've always remembered that. It's like whatever you do, you've just got to do it. You know, if you're gonna sing, you sing. You know, you got to get right up on that mic, and you know, there's
Yeah.
no use, you know, holding back.
I think that's a general point as well. I think with a lot of creative people who, I think this especially applies to people who didn't like do a whole ass degree like I did. Because with me, it's like, okay, now this is kind of what I have to do, something related to this. But I think a lot of people who have hobbies and passions, whether, again, if that's art, if that's, film and TV, if that's literature, if that's music, there is like a real pressure about putting yourself out there because a lot of it is making yourself vulnerable. And maybe you're not as chronically aware of that when you're 14, but like, especially when you get to like 16, 17, 18, you're like, oh my God, like I can't like put a piece of myself out there because that's what it is a lot of the time. It is sort of like sacrificing a piece of yourself to create this like whatever it may end up being, whether it's beautiful or tragic or whatever you want it to be. Um, but it's
Or
interesting that you
beautifully
say
tragic.
beautifully tragic. Yeah. Um, it's interesting that you say you feel like you sort of had to do it as well. Like that's a very interesting perspective because again, like I personally can't really relate to like your particular sort of trajectory of like so young. And maybe you don't realize this because it's obviously your experience, but like, yeah, to do that at 14 is pretty awesome. Yeah.
So I guess what I want to do now is pivot a bit. Similar sort of topic, but what was your first tour like? Because I feel like that is something with playing a concert again. An open
Mhm.
mic is not the same as, playing in a band, but I sort of know what it's like to be on stage and to perform. But I feel like touring is a whole different thing that most people haven't experienced. So what was it like doing that for the first time?
My first tour was definitely, I think, not typical of a lot of tours that I would come to know. Excuse me. My very first tour was in 2014. Oh my God, it was 10 years ago. I want to die. Um, so it was, I played in a few bands here in Rhode Island, quite a long time, one of which was my band. You know, eventually I did pick up guitar, start putting chords to my own songs, kept writing songs forever, and then eventually had my own group, Dylan Sevey and the Gentlemen. And so the first tour I ever went on was with the Gentlemen back in 2014, and we mostly stuck around the northeastern part of the United States. You know, I know we went up to uh, Portland, Maine, down through New Hampshire and Massachusetts, and eventually made our way. It was interesting though because uh, a lot of great things initially happened. You know, we really it was important for me to learn at that point dynamics. Like, hey, we're playing on some small stages or in some small rooms here, you know, which we had done before in Rhode Island at these different venues, but I think there was this added sort of, I don't know, pressure is the right word, but we're going to this new place for the first time. We want to leave a good impression. Like, let's be very mindful of what we're sounding like right here. And we were a rock and roll band. So it kind of, I think there's this thing. It's like, oh, well, when you're a rock and roll band, you play loud and you play hard. And yeah, you can do that. And I think sometimes you should do that. You know, you want to keep the energy, but going to some of these other rooms, it's like, well, how can we put forth all the energy we want to put forth and make this sound as nice and big and powerful as possible without like alienating all these people, you know. I think, you know, it's great when, you know, an artist is able to alienate their audience, but you have to actually establish an audience before you can alienate them, I think. Um, and so that was great. And it's funny because I'd say the first, oh God, I think there were maybe 10 shows on that tour. And the first 8 shows all went great to varying degrees. And I had heard all these stories about like, oh, tour, you know, you got to get ready. You know, there's going to be some nights that really suck and people don't come out to see you, or it's a crappy venue, this and that and this and that. But the first 8 shows, is like, yeah, and there were a couple, you know, playing a weeknight in New Hope, Pennsylvania, you know, or Baltimore, which I'd never been to before in my life. It's like, okay, yeah, there's not a lot of people here, but there are some people here, you know, that the local acts have brought out, and they are responding to us and they're listening to us. And I've said it back then, and I'll still say today, I would rather play for 8 people who are super into what you're doing and are responding to it and reacting than 8,000 who don't give a shit. Because I've played festivals to 4 or 5 thousand people, which sounds awesome, but when aside from like maybe 20 people at the front seem to kind of care and the rest of them don't, it's like it's a very confusing
Yeah.
feeling.
That reminds me, before you carry on, I went to see Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band
Mhm.
in Hyde Park this year, and it was incredible. Um, and the act on
Proudest.
just before them were the Chicks, and they were really good, but
Yeah.
nobody cared. Everybody was getting a drink or getting a hot dog or whatever, and it was like, oh, there's also music playing. And I can only imagine how jarring that because you're in Hyde Park, it is packed, and only like 20% of the people are actually like properly intently listening, you know. So I thought
I,
that was
I
sort of an interesting experience, and they're like, fairly big as well, you know.
Of course. No, I mean for years I had dreamt of playing Pukkel Pop, which is I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a festival over there in Belgium. I grew up. There was a Pearl Jam bootleg that I had, you know, Pearl Jam Pukkel Pop, and a few other artists like in my head, like I held it to the same degree as, you know, Coachella and Lollapalooza and all these other places. And I got to play this festival back in, I think it was 2018. Literally a childhood dream come true. And when it was over, my reaction was literally like, okay, because like, and part of it was I remember the tour we were on was a very grueling tour, and so it wasn't in a great headspace anyway. But then we played it, and yeah, I mean there had to be at least 4 or 5 thousand people there, and I don't know if anyone cared. And you know, when you're trying to put forth a bunch of energy, you need some of that coming back to you. um but you know, when I'm playing in Baltimore, Maryland on a Wednesday night on my very first tour, um and yeah, there's only 8 people there, but those 8 people are getting into it and they're listening and they're buying CDs afterwards and they're asking you, are you going to come back? Like, there's no feeling like that. And man, I thought I'd hit the lottery. Like, I'm on my first tour. I'm with my best buds. We're playing all these shows. And yeah, the first 8 or 9 maybe, like they all go great. And then we went into New York City and I was so stoked because all these shows were going great, and now we were going in, and my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, she was living in New York, and I'm like, oh my God, and now she gets to like, you know, come out and like see what we've been doing, and played one of the most miserable shows that I've ever played in my life. And that was when it hit me like, oh, this is what it can be like. We played this show at a venue that literally could not keep their power on. It did, as miserable as it was, it actually did lead to one of my favorite memories ever. So I remember early in the set, I'm already in a bad mood because we showed up at this venue and already the person was talking about how I needed to pay them at the end of the night, which was not something we had discussed when we booked the show. And there weren't a whole lot of people there. Like it was like a whole thing. It was a really dirty place. Not in a, sometimes you find a nice dirty dive bar. This was just dirty. It sucked. Um, Second or third song, power goes out, and we're wondering what the fuck is happening. And it comes back on, and like at this point, I'm in a terrible mood. And but you keep playing the set, and then the second to last song, the power goes out again, and I am ready to take off my guitar and fucking storm off stage. Then when the power comes back on, God bless him, my buddy Steve, who was playing bass with the band at the time, in the time that the power had been out, it was maybe 10 seconds. He had taken his shirt off. He had he had a fire hat with it. We had gone to there's a restaurant chain here in the United States called Firehouse Subs, and when you go, they have like little fireman's hats that you can take with you if you want. And we had all taken one. He had brought it on stage with him, unbeknownst to me, taken a shirt off, put on the fireman's hat. He had lowered his bass to be like at his knees, like he was friggin' Chris Novoselic. And when the lights came back on, he just looks up at me and nods at me with the fire hat and his shirt off, and that was what I needed to be like, okay, I can get through this, and we'll get through this. Um, but it was miserable. And then, yeah, at the end of the night, the guy was like, "Yeah, you need to give me $250 because you didn't make enough money at the door." And it was brutal. And like, it felt like in one fell swoop, I was like, "This is how ugly people in the business can be. This is how shitty places can be. This is how like all your morale can be fucking swept out from underneath you." Um, and like I said, it was a very unique tour. I mean, I was in a van or I was in an SUV that my mom like rented for us because she was like, "Oh, I'll make sure you're taken care of." My second tour later that year with the same band down south, we borrowed a van. We had to pay for it ourselves. Lost a lot more money, and it was a disaster. But it was a necessary disaster. I learned a lot from it. I learned something from probably the first like 10 or 11 tours I went on. I felt like I learned something. And to this day, I feel like almost every tour I go on, I still take something away from it.
Yeah, and I think what's really important when it comes to taking setbacks in general is, and this is so much easier said than done, but is to just like maybe like cry about it or be angry about it for a bit, but after a while you have to just look at it, see what you did, see if you could have done anything different, and if it was in your control, then sort of look inwardly, and if it wasn't, then there's nothing you can do about it, and you just got to sort of move forward. And I think that's why it's great that you told that story, because you can be on like such a high in life in general, and then you
Mm.
just feel like it was all for nothing, and it's just taken away from you. So yeah, really, really
Yeah.
cool story. I guess this is kind of linked. Um, what would you say are your best and worst experiences playing live?
My worst experiences, I mean, I would say I can probably think of a few, oh, I remember when this happened, I remember when this happened. But sort of like a blanket worst experience is when and it happens all the time. You play a show that's maybe not, in the general wheelhouse that you like, the bands that I historically have played with, we do well at a venue that is, a real music venue, a place where people come to see live music, probably to some degree that they are familiar with, because I, I have played shows with cover bands, but I've never been in a full-time cover band, where you go out to, the casino here and you play your songs and whatever. Um, I've always been about playing original music. But you do get those gigs at the casino or the restaurant or whatever it is. And for me, consistently, the worst blanket experience is when, especially when you're on stage. And it's still terrible when you're off stage, but when you're on stage and people kind of look at you and they do the whole like, "Hey, do you know any Skinnerd? Or do you know any Johnny Cash?" And it's like, man, like, you have so I want to give some people the benefit of a doubt. There's so many um lines of work that I don't understand whatsoever. And I don't expect everybody to understand, what it is to be a working musician. But you to work so hard at playing and writing and procuring your original music, and for someone to see you and their first thought is like, "Oh, well, here's my little monkey to entertain me, and I want to hear Sweet Home Alabama right now."
Mm. And I think as well, like that when you get to a certain point, there must be like pressure to play particular songs as well. That like
Mm,
probably bands are extremely sick of. The obvious example is Radiohead never playing Creep, right? Like that.
yeah.
And I'm sure there are people who go to Radiohead concerts like this is going to be the time. This is going to be the time. And and I just yeah, I think what's really cool is when you hear about artists like I think Dylan did it a lot. Back in the day when he was touring with the Heartbreakers. But I know King Gizzard do it a lot still, where they would just do like entire different set lists for each day, you know. And
Mhm.
I think that's such a cool thing because then it's like you're rewarding people for going more than once, like the diehard fans, but
Mhm.
also, you know, there is this element of like you could hear any song at any moment, nothing is sort of off the table. And I guess it is a bit disappointing when a set list, when you go see somebody, for me anyway, it would be a bit disappointing if it's just exactly what I expected. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of people don't have that. They just want to hear songs that they already know. And I think that is a general, like, a general, not problem, but a general fact of like music consumers. And like you said, especially people who are not just there for the music, they're also there to like have dinner or whatever, you know?
Yeah. And let me I've played some brutal restaurant gigs in my life. But yeah, I mean, that's what I've always respected. I mean, going back to the White Stripes, I believe between the White Stripes and his solo shows, Jack White he doesn't use set lists. It's, we're gonna start playing and we're gonna see where it takes us. And yeah, you're never gonna see the same show twice. Like, you go to every show on tour, you'll always see a different show, which I think is amazing. And even when I saw McCartney in '09, I mean, he played like 36 songs. And McCartney's the ultimate example. Like, if you went to go see him and he played Let It Be and he played Hey Jude and he walked off stage, you'd be like, wow, that was amazing. But the first like half of the show, there's certainly some hits sprinkled in here and there. I think he opened the show with like Drive My Car and Jet, but he played two songs from his 1997 solo album, which is one of my favorite of his solo records. But like, here he is in 2009 breaking out these two songs from his 97 record. I'm like, that is so friggin' cool, or he's breaking out, like these, of course he does Band on the Run and Let Me Roll It Later, but then he's also breaking out Mrs. Vanderbilt. Like, oh, like a Band on the Run deep cut, or like certain songs here and there. Like, and I think that is so cool. It's the same thing with seeing Springsteen. I mean, Springsteen up until these last couple years, where his set list has become noticeably more static. For years, never played the same set every single night. But even now, with the static set list, it's not exactly what you'd expect. Anyway, we've totally digressed, and I apologize
Yeah.
for that.
So
But
what about your best experience playing?
my best experience, I've been trying to think about this, and it's really, really difficult. When I think of the best shows I've ever played, there are there's three that really stick out to me. I did come up with a top five shows that I've ever played, and three in particular. One, for the sake of stroking my own ego, because as you know, to be a creative type is living in this really strange in between of thinking so much of yourself that, hey, this thing that I'm doing, everyone should want to see this or hear this. And thinking so little of yourself to think nothing I do is ever good. And it is so strange. But my old band, The Gentlemen, we booked a we booked a show. It was our 100th show celebration. I am a psycho with keeping spreadsheets. I have a list of every single venue that I've ever played in my entire life. But especially for my own band, I was nuts. We played a different set list every night. I kept every single set list in a document. So when I knew it was our 100th show, I booked a local place down here in Southern Rhode Island, and it was right around Christmas time, and we packed out the venue, and all of my friends were there. And we obviously had the full band, but I got a bunch of my friends to come up and do be like a horn section with us for a few songs. Some other people who had been in the band in the past came out to the show. They came up and did some songs with us. We had all these friends up on stage. It was totally packed. Um, and it was just like the ultimate, like, holy shit, here I am. Like, it's a pretty big venue on a big stage. I'm singing my songs to all of these people, most of whom I know, but I also I'm smart enough. I know when people are there to see me out of obligation, and I know when people are there to see me because they actually want to. And like, holy shit, these people want to be here, and we're crushing it. And that to this day is really amazing. The other two in particular, um, one was when I was playing with Ron Gallo, who I played with for 3 years. We played at a place in London called the Moth Club. I think it's in the Hackney area. I'm really bad with London geography. And it was a free show on a Monday night, and it was kind of this place that I think they typically have a lot of free shows, and it's kind of got like a built-in crowd. Um, but it was completely sold out on a Monday. They were at capacity, but it even just wasn't that it was a built-in crowd. It's that these people knew we were playing and they listened to our music, and it's just this packed out place, this little club in London where everyone is singing along to every song. This usually for all of these, if the sound is good, if the sound on stage is good, because I played so many shows where the sound on stage was absolutely terrible. And then I'll see videos and it sounds amazing and people are having a great time. But like I'm up on stage worrying or wondering, like, I don't know what the hell's happening. But the sound is great. You're getting all this energy. Like, there's these speakers, on the side of the stage that people are like having to sit on and like kind of turned around and they're into it. And you're just surrounded by this love and this community. And for me, that, speaks to kind of what I said before, like wanting to reach people in the same way. Um, but the most recent one, and it was a actually one of the most incredible, like amazing experiences, like when I really think about where I was at personally, but where the world was at, it was 2021, and we've just had the pandemic for well over, you go all of 2020, all the music festivals are canceled, all the gigs are canceled. Towards the end of the year, we start figuring out, hey, we can do these outdoor social distance gigs, and that's great and everything. But then 2021 rolls around, there's that little period where not only is everyone getting vaccinated, but also we're not having all these weird strains yet. So it's like we're kind of like free again. But there's a big festival in Tennessee called Bonnaroo, and it had obviously been canceled in 2020, and then they had to cancel it again in 21 because there was a massive rainstorm that flooded the entire festival grounds, and they were like, we can't bring anything, like we can't get any buses here because it's just mud. And Jason Isbell is headlining, and like all these other huge acts. So like 2 days before this festival, like every venue in Nashville and Memphis and Knoxville and Atlanta and Asheville, North Carolina, kind of anywhere in like a 200-mile radius. It's like, all right, well, I guess we're gonna have a surprise Jason Isbell show here tonight. And there's a guy, his name is Mark Ribier. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Um, he's he's like a DJ. His nickname is Loop Daddy, and basically that's what he does. He creates loops live on stage. Nothing is ever pre-planned. There's an element of humor to what he does. He has a huge fan base. He's big on YouTube, and he was going to be at the festival, and he got booked in a town called Chattanooga, which is Eastern Tennessee. And the Minks, we're a rock and roll band, some elements of psychedelic blues, garage rock, but rock and roll. And their manager knew our booking agent. And he's like, hey, like, I know that stylistic wise this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but I think it's going to be a great crowd. And Mark loves it when rock and roll bands open for him, so if you want to come, we're like, fuck yeah, we'll go do it. It was a 36-hour turnaround decision. And when we got there, the entire crowd, they were there for Mark, but they were also there because we've just gone through this worldwide, massive event that, like, we didn't know if we were ever gonna make it out of this. And like, we get to see live music again, and we thought we were gonna do it at this big festival with all these drugs and the campgrounds and everything like that. And okay, we're not there, but we're at this venue, we're at this big room to see this guy we love. And it was the most palpable, happy, and like celebratory, like, holy shit. We came out on stage, we had a 35-40 minute opening set. No one in this crowd knew who we were, and no one in that crowd was there for us. But when the lights came down and we walked out on stage and they were going to get to see live music again, it was the most like stereotypical like eruption of crowd noise. And I remember, because I'm a fucking ham, like, the lights went down and they kind of shone a spotlight as we're walking out. They start going nuts. And I'm like sort of taken back, and I make this sort of this little pose like this. And as soon as I do that, they ramp it up a notch. And then it just sort of became this comical, like, during the whole course of our set, we'd be playing and our guitarist would take a solo. And it's like, when you hear those live albums where the post-production's so bad and they're like, we need to add some crowd noise in here to make it sound like they were going crazy. It was like that. We would finish, he would start soloing and it was this rush of noise. He would finish, it was this rush of noise. I would do like, not even this crazy fill, just like a little drum fill, rush of noise. It was the most celebratory, amazing uh environment that I can imagine having ever played in. And like I said, similar to that show I played in London, it was like, this is why I do this. And there's nothing like it, and nothing will ever be like it.
So it's interesting how you prepare questions for an interview sometimes, and the answers of other questions kind of reframe the question. And after
Yep.
you said that you knew that this is what you wanted to do at a very young age, and it's sort of like you didn't really know anything else, that you were like, this is going to be my thing, kind of changes this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I know that this is going to be a bit of a turn in the podcast because Dylan has definitely, I would say, helped me in my mental health journey through sort of like advice and tips and strategies and all this kind of stuff. So this was something I was very conscious would come up, would be sort of the mental health side of things. And it's also something that I want to do generally with this podcast because I think it's a very important thing. And I do think it is tied to a lot of creative people's sort of ambitions and this sort of like, whether something is good for you to do. So long story short, my question is, how often do you doubt what you're doing? Like in terms of like you're working two extra jobs to be able to do this as well. I'm not judging. I think it's great that you do this, but
Of course.
I understand that like as a creative, there are going to be moments where you're just like, what am I doing? And how often do you think you get those? And and how do you sort of overcome them, generally speaking?
I'm tempted to say every single day, but I don't know if it's so much a matter of me doubting what I do as it is questioning some of the greater existential, like, why is this like this, and why is this like this for me? Like, I I don't feel as if I have a choice. I feel I have to be doing this. But I work at the bookstore and I work at the record store, and honestly, in terms of, non-creative jobs, I like working in retail. Retail makes sense to me. I worked in a record store here in Rhode Island growing up for 5 or 6 years, and I always say it's the best real job I ever had. I got to sit around, listen to music, organize music, talk to people about music, sell people music, know that I'm changing people's lives by talking to them and selling them music. But it's like, man, so I feel like I'm good at two things. I feel like I'm good at playing music and working in retail. And gee, I wonder what the two things are that uh people respect the absolute least and pay the absolute least. Oh, wait, it's the two things that I'm good at. And so it's more so like so I don't know if it's necessarily a matter of questioning um what am I doing? Why am I doing this? I think it's more so like, why these, why couldn't I feel this connection, this passion towards engineering, towards any of these other things. And it's difficult. And it's especially difficult because there's so many stigmas that I feel like are getting broken down every day. Um, but they are still there. As as little as I think 4 years ago now, I remember having a conversation with my one of my uncles, and he straight up asked me like, "Oh, so when are you gonna get a real job?" And I didn't know how to communicate. Well, I have a real job. I'm not, you know, a lawyer like you, or whatever. I don't want to give away what he actually does, because I mean he won't ever watch this, but um, all right. I even remember one time I was um, playing a festival in Spain at the same time that one of my cousins was doing some military training, and I think he was in like Greece or something like that. And um, there was like a family reunion happening over in the States, and I had some downtime, and I was able to zoom in. And some of my family members asked me like, "Oh, you're in Spain, blah, blah. Oh, Alex is in Greece right now." And I was like, "Yeah, it's wild that we're both here in Europe. It's just too bad that we're both busy and we can't find a way to get together." And I heard one of my aunts in the background say like, "Well, Alex isn't just on vacation." And I just wanted to say, is that what you think I'm doing right now? You think that me being literally overseas, how many thousands of ways, away from home, away from my wife and my bed and my cats, and choosing, being in a van, like staying in hostels that are like 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and what, like, you think this is vacation for me? Like, I've been to Paris, France 3 times now, and I've not seen Paris. I haven't been to I've seen the Eiffel Tower. I've driven past it at 2 in the morning on the way back to the hotel. I've been to 43 of the 50 US states. I've played music in 17 different countries, and I have seen some amazing things and I've done some amazing things. But I am not on vacation. You know, I like so many people have absolutely no idea the work and the commitment and the sacrifice that goes into it. And it often feels to me like, well, at least my reward for that is that no one understands or respects what I do, and I don't have any money, and I'm 32 years old, and I'm and I have to question why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. You know, I always say I have nothing to show for it, and that's true monetarily. I have so much to show for it from, in terms of experiences, emotional intelligence, and everything like that. But I think about it often, I would say.
Yeah. And another just quick question off the back of that. How would you break down your like work slash mental health balance? Because I kind of know quite well how busy you actually are. Do you find it like hard to just find time to just exist, and like be able to process things? Because I think that's a
Yeah,
thing that's common for a lot of working creatives.
100%. And it's funny that you've asked me to come on and have these conversations because I've been very open about the fact that about a year and a half ago, I did a 6-week intensive outpatient program, because I was dealing with some severe um, mental distress. It was it ended up being making that decision was absolutely brutal because of what went into making it, but ultimately it became the best decision I ever made, and I learned so many things um that have continued to carry me through today. But it's funny that you've asked me to come on because I would say where I'm currently at is the, I don't want to say the worst, quote unquote, that I've been in the year and a half since then, but like I think right now I am being challenged more than I ever have. If you asked me to have this conversation a week out of getting out of this facility, I'd be like, let me extol all the great measures of mental health upon you. And right now I'm like, dude, I'm a fucking wreck right now. I don't know what to tell you. But I'm aware that I'm a little bit of a wreck right now. And I am smart enough to know that, what I'm doing right now is simultaneously not sustainable, but I am capable of doing it. And I recognize that I recognize that I would like to find a better balance. And I've tried to drift away from using I should, or I need to, or I have to, but I should find a better balance than what I'm currently doing. I work a lot, because I kind of have to right now. And that's very, very difficult. If there's a perfect answer, I haven't found it yet. Um, but at the same time, I do my best at least a couple times a week to take stock of where I'm at, even if it's just being honest and saying, I'm bad. I am not doing well. I am tired. I am exhausted. I am feeling resentful. I am feeling out of control. And I can write it out and look at it and say, okay, there I am. And now I can move forward. Um, so it's difficult. But it's also necessary.
So we took a quick break, and I've managed to get a light on because I did not expect we'd be going past sunset for our recording. But it's been a very fun conversation, and we are going to be winding it down a little bit. We've talked about your sort of inspirations, your beginnings. We talked about concerts and all those kind of things, which I think we could do a whole other follow-up podcast about all your different tour stories and that kind of stuff down the line. If you want to hear that, leave a comment. But I've got two questions that are quite similar. I'm going to ask you in a moment what your proudest moment as a musician is. But first, I know that you've had at least a couple of sort of big time encounters with big musicians, and I want to know what your biggest like pinch yourself moment was, where you're just like, I can't believe who I'm in a room with, who I'm having a conversation with, whose phone number I've got. You can give me two or three if you want, but just so you don't offend people. But I'm intrigued.
Um, well, it was simultaneously one of my biggest pinch me moments. But it was more so the way my friend reacted. I was at the Newport Folk Festival in think it was 2014, and Jack White was there, and I was backstage um watching of all people, John C. Riley was playing a set of folk music, and he's very good. Um and Jack White came up and kind of stood like in front a little bit off to the side of my friend and I. And definitely in my head I'm like, "Oh my God, it's Jack White. He's right there." And my friend who's right next to me, he keeps looking at the stage, but he leans into me and goes, "Is that Jack White?" And I go, "Mm-hmm." My friend leans back in and says, "Are you fucking kidding me right now?" And he was so like ultimate what do I do with my hands moment, and all he could do was just stand there and pretend like it wasn't happening. Um, but that was definitely a moment. And then I saw him a little bit later, and I said, "Hey Jack, I don't want to bother you. I just wanted to thank you for the meet," which is generally whenever I've had the opportunity to meet um someone who I admire. I don't ever want to do like the whole like, "Oh my God, I love your music." I'm like, "Oh, fucking duh, everybody does." Um, but like genuinely, I want to express gratitude, and so I just said that, and he shook my hand, said, Thanks so much." He said, "Are you going to be at the set later?" I'm like, "Yes, I will be. In fact, be watching you play later." And he then said on stage, he was just like, "This is the most amazing festival. It's the first festival in 20 years where like truly I feel like I've been a part of it, and like everyone here's been so nice, and I haven't felt like anyone has like bothered me." And I like turned to my friends, I was like, "I didn't bother him." I was so proud of that. And I've actually done some work in the warehouse at Third Man, and I've met Jack a handful of times, and Jack is not only a very kind person, but a very gracious person, and he treats the people that he works with and that work for him very, very well. And a few other folk festivals ago, God, I guess it would have been 2019, or can't remember the year. I ended up backstage, and to my right, who I had also met earlier that day, was Ben Montench, the keyboardist in Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, who Petty for me is behind only the Beatles and Dylan on my pantheon of old, and you know, getting to meet him and talk to him. So he was right there, and then to my right, uh, and I had no idea they were there until I turned around because I heard something and like, "Oh, it's James Taylor. Hey, what's up?" I don't even like James Taylor, but when James Taylor is standing next to you, you're like, "Oh, uh."
I'm glad that your first response was, "Oh, I don't even like you." And you
I
like,
said that to him. I said, "Man, like, has anyone ever told you like how mid you are outside of like a few select songs?" And then he broke down crying, and it was a whole thing. Um, no, I think I just gave him a knowing nod, and he nodded right back, and that was about it. Those are definitely some of the most, and then I don't know if I might have told you the story. I don't know if I have or not, but I got to play a festival when I was playing with Ron. I got to play a festival in Texas back in 2017. And the night that we were playing, it was just us, a band called Hooray for the Riff Raff, who we had actually toured with earlier that year, and we loved them. They were buddies of ours, and Wilco. And Wilco is a top 10 all-time act. Like up until that point, I'd already seen them probably 4 or 5 times. And then we're playing this small little festival, um and we're backstage, and they're all, Jeff is keeping to himself, but the rest of the guys they're out and they're hanging out, and they're all extremely kind. And I'm talking to John Strout, the bassist, and he he went to school. I can't remember if he went to school or if he just lived in Oxford, Mississippi for a while, but that's where my wife went to school, and now he lives up in Maine, which is another New England state like Rhode Island. So we're just hitting on it. It was like this guy is a founding member of one of my all-time favorite bands who I've seen forever. Like, and I legitimately just feel like I'm talking to like my uncle right now, just like a super cool guy. And I told him like, hey, my girlfriend and I are coming to see you in Atlanta in 2 weeks. And he takes my phone and he puts his number in and says, hit me up, see if we can grab a drink for it. And if not, like I'll get you backstage after the show. And I'm like, yeah, sure, that sounds fine, I guess. Like that, if you think so, if you want to, sure. And then in the 2 weeks in between that festival and then going to see him in Atlanta, Tom Petty dies. And I'm a very emotional person, but crying is not my go-to response. For whatever reason, it usually takes a lot. So when he died, I was so like beyond shocked. He had just played his last show a week before. And but like I'm just sort of like going through the week in a total daze or whatever. And then, 6 days later, we're down in Atlanta and we're watching Wilco, and surprise, surprise, they're fucking incredible like they always are. Um and my wife, and my wife likes like a decent amount of their music, but like she's not like she does not live and breathe music. She has her artists and songs and albums that she likes, but my wife is thoroughly unimpressed by me, which is awesome. Like that is what I need, and I hope that never changes. Um but like even she was like kind of blown. When you see a band play I'm trying to break your heart in this like amazing little venue, there's nothing that really tops that. But then they come out for their encore and they bust into The Waiting, which is probably my favorite Tom Petty song, probably a friggin' top 20 all-time song for me ever. And I am beside myself happy. Like, oh my God, like a top five band is playing a song by another top five artist who just passed away, and they sound amazing and they're celebrating, and I'm so happy. And I look around and I see everybody in the crowd smiling and singing along. And at that moment, the entire week all hit me, and I am just fucking waterworks. And my wife next to me sort of like looks at me and like slow, slowly, she pulls a Homer Simpson into the bushes. Um, and then I texted John and we went backstage after the show. And I'm pretty sure the first thing I said to him was like, why did you do that? Why did you do that to me? So that was really cool. Yeah, I've been lucky enough to meet and occasionally, I say work with, I use that term very loosely. I firstly I hate, you know, name dropping all the time. Like even saying like, oh yeah, I worked in the Third Man warehouse. So I've met Jack White does not know who I am. There might be some facial recognition, but if he remembers my first name, I will be pleasantly surprised. Um James Taylor has not thought about that moment since it happened. You know, but still, I've been very, very lucky, and you know, obviously the idolization of, your favorite artist is a very slippery slope, and something that we all need to be cognizant of. I'm very lucky that I was never a huge Ryan Adams fan, because I know people that's a daily conundrum for them. If it came out that, Jim James was like the worst person ever, I'd be like, well, what am I supposed to do with all these My Morning Jacket records, but at the end of the day, like, despite, the humanity of all of us, like I said, I've always wanted to reach people in this particular way, and these people's works have reached me and touched me, and like definitely the times in which I found myself in a position where, yeah, okay, not that I'm this person's equal, but that I can even be in their presence and be reminded of what this is all about, that's a really special thing.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if they remember who you are or not because like it's your experience, and like
Yeah.
you said, as long as you're reasonable about it, then it's harmless and it's a beautiful
Well,
thing.
one thing, and I'll do my best not to make it too much of a tangent, but one thing that's always stuck with me, Ron's old manager was good friends with Hannibal Buress, who's a comedian here. I don't know if you know Hannibal at all. And the first time I went down to South by Southwest with Ron, Hannibal was down there and just like, oh my, we're at this venue and Hannibal's here. We're all in a circle. We're all talking, hanging out. I was like, oh crap. And and as we're talking to him, like a couple people every now and then are like, hey, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, Hannibal, but I just want to let you know, like, I love your comedy, like, and like, thank you so much, like, and like, super gracious, like, oh, thank you so much, like, what's your name, blah blah blah. And then at one point, some guy came by and was, Hannibal, Hannibal, like, oh, we get a photo and whatnot, and he was just like, hey, buddy, how about a name, like something like that. And then when we were walking out, like an hour later, I heard that guy on the phone, like, I met Hannibal earlier and he was kind of a dick. And that really, but it opened my eyes because you hear that stuff all the time, like, oh, I met so and so once, or like, or I've heard, I know someone that met them and they weren't great. And I always take that with a grain of salt. Certainly at a certain point, if you hear it all the time about a particular person, then you can put the pieces together. But like, I'm sure you can find someone out there who said, oh, I met Dave Grohl and he was a dick once. It's like, well, knowing what we know about Dave Grohl and his personality, either he was having a bad day, which he's allowed to because he's a human, or you did not approach the situation correctly.
Yeah,
And
what people forget is that we've all been dicks to like our closest friends and our family.
I have
Never
never
mind
been a
like
bad
someone
person to anyone.
never mind someone you've never met who has just come up to you like demanding a photo, right? It's something that
Yeah,
YouTubers talk a lot about because I feel like YouTubers have like people who do it professionally, they have like a connection to their audience that maybe a lot of people, in other sort of types of arts don't have, and with like conventions and stuff like that. And it's sort of been coming out more and more where people will just like film people without like
yeah,
saying anything. And it's just like come up for a picture. Like we're not going to say no. Like we're going to like actually talk to you rather than you just like film me while I'm with my friends and
yeah. It,
But
it's
anyway,
like, anyway.
I'm sorry. We'll definitely do a part two because I feel like you and
No,
I
no,
could
no, no,
talk.
no. Talking about awareness, I need you and everyone watching to know. I know I talk a lot, it's a part of me that I don't love, but it's who I am
What
sometimes.
else are podcasts for? People who talk too much. Final big question is, what is your proudest moment as a professional musician? Meeting James Taylor, right?
Meeting James Taylor and telling him that his cover of How Sweet It Is makes me want to die. Um, and that Shower the People is the most offensively 80s song that I've ever heard. Um, my proudest moment as a musician, you know, there's a few things, and it's difficult to talk about these things, I feel like, without coming off like a prick to some degree, but like I it is easy sometimes not to lose the plot necessarily, but like, hey, I've made the decision to do this professionally, so I need to think about what's my best career move here, what makes sense for me monetarily. I need to think about this like a business. And yeah, and then when you do experience some great stuff, like, hey, like I want to, play the late night shows. I want to play, in front of all these people and whatnot. Um, but I have a pair of friends here in Rhode Island who they came out to all of my shows. Both the Gentlemen and the other bands that I was in up here. And then one of them at a certain point moved to Chicago, and they were kind of struggling. Like these two sisters are really really close, and they have a super strong bond. And um, a lyric in one of the songs that I wrote. The line finishes, "Is the sky so beautiful back home?" And that was a line that they really like, kind of rap. They really gravitated towards that, like when they were thinking about like how they were going to miss each other and things like that. And they got matching tattoos with that lyric like across their wrist. And like that was one of those like, oh my God, like the ultimate, again, not to beat the dead horse, but like, okay, that's why I do this. Like that's why I started doing this. And of and of course, when I found that out and told people, everyone was, predictably like, "Oh my God, like that's so incredible." The one person who reacted strangely to it was my wife. She was like, "That's weird." Like it's a bit. She's like, "I think you're letting this go to your head a little bit. I think that's really weird." And I'm like, "Okay, fine." Or even like, same thing. I was playing a show with Ron, and my wife had gotten me this shirt that was a photo of a television, and on the television it just says "Go outside." And I was wearing that shirt, and a lot of Ron's music and Ron's lyrics deal with as I guess as most songwriters do, the human condition, but like Ron is very much about, self-realization, self-actualization and whatnot. And uh this guy came out to the show where I was wearing that shirt, and like hearing Ron's lyrics and like seeing that shirt, like he got my shirt like tattooed on him in the same way. And like he sent it to me over Instagram and was like, "Hey, like this made me really rethink, a lot of things in my life." And I just wanted to like, he's like, "I know it sounds weird to thank you for wearing a shirt, but like seriously, thank you." And so it's stuff like that. And then even just from a performing level, um it's so difficult to say because like there have just been so many times, these little moments that stick with me. Speaking of Springsteen, I was playing once in Asbury Park, and we had a song. The gentleman had a song that the main part of it was sort of just like a bluesy number in the key of E, and like the breakdown of the song, we used to kind of incorporate other little like cover songs into it, like "Meet Me in the Morning" by Bob Dylan, or like I'd play the "Whole Lot of Love" lick sometimes, like just bluesy stuff in the key of E. And we were in Asbury Park. um I was like, "Hey guys, like learn the first verse and chorus of "Spirit in the Night" by Springsteen, because it's in this E blues thing, and it'll be funny and cool." And so we played the set, and when we did that song, um we there were these two guys at the bar who they could not have been bothered that we were playing music. They were there to get a couple drinks after work, and that was it. They did not clap after any songs, and frankly, I was fine with it. Those guys knew what they were there for, and they were not, pretending to be anything else. But when we broke into down, 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 bow, bow, ba, but these guys turn around and like you could see it like hit them, and they're like, these guys have been in Asbury Park their whole lives. Like who the hell knows how many times they've seen or met Bruce Springsteen, like what their music has meant to him. And like for me, my proudest moment as a musician, it's so hard to pin it down to one, but like there have just been these certain times where you can tell that you tap into this true emotional response, um that brings out somebody's, whether it's their inner child, whether it is, some other deeper aspect of their life experience. And that stuff really, really matters to me. The one thing that I just remembered though, I used to work with special needs kids, and one of my um, favorite uh, clients that I worked with, and I still try to keep in touch with him a little bit to this day. He loved, singing and playing guitar and whatnot. And one of the songs that his whole family loved is it's a song from The Wedding Singer called "Grow Old with You." I don't know if you know that particular song, but it's a really nice, beautiful love song. And his dad plays all the time a guitar with him. And when his sister got married, he really wanted to sing this song. He not only wanted to sing it at her wedding, but he wanted to keep it a secret. And like he can't keep secrets. He's like it just the way that he communicates with people, he's an open book, but he was so determined to keep this a secret. And so him and his mom asked me if I would come to the wedding and play, and like being at this wedding, like, and I grew to know his whole family really well. And I know for them, like watching him, his name is Ben, watching him get up there and sing a song in front of like a crowd, like to his sister on her wedding day. Uh, I was playing the guitar and I was singing it along with him. And I looked up at one point and I saw her just like everyone around her. It was total water, and I had to immediately look back down because I knew that I was gonna fucking lose it. But like that was one moment where the power of music definitely really took hold of me. Again, just the classic, like remembering what this all means to people. And that was one of my proudest moments as a musician, was giving someone else a vehicle and a voice to be able to express themselves in this way. Because for a lot of people who are handicapped to that degree, like it's hard. I mean, it's hard for people like who function like us, to sometimes explain ourselves and express ourselves. And so that was definitely one of my absolute proudest moments.
It's lovely.
Yeah.
Coming back around to being selfless again, I see, after spending, an hour and a half talking about yourself. It's great. It's been
Listen,
longer
I'm
than an
just
hour and a
for the
half.
people. I just like care about people. I care about creating a better future. So yeah.
Final question, and this is a very sort of straight answer one. If you can, I don't know if that's something that you can do.
Absolutely not.
What would be your one piece of advice for someone wanting to start off, specifically as an aspiring musician, but in general, anything creative? They've got a burning hobby and they feel like they need to do it, but they just don't know how to do it and how to go about it. What would be your one piece of advice?
My one piece of advice is to do it, because you have two options. The first one is to do it, and that will, if not, if it doesn't immediately answer the question of like, okay, was this what I wanted it to be and did I enjoy this? It will open up these other avenues for you to explore. And that in and of itself is a great thing. And maybe it's something that, maybe there's someone out there who like, hey, I just want to play one song on stage one time in my life. The other option is you don't do it and you spend the rest of your life wondering, should I have? Could I have? Could I still? There are so many reasons not to do something. And there are a lot of things that we should not do, obviously. Um, but when it comes to something like that, you do it.
Yeah, I think as well, even if like, I used to make like little films when I was younger, when I
Mhm.
was first really getting into film, in my sort of early to mid teens, and a lot of them not great. Some of them like are lost to time, and I can never like revisit them. But I'd be a very different person now if I hadn't done them. And there's a lot of things like
Yeah.
that where I am of the opinion where, I'd rather do something poorly than to have never done it at all if I want to do it. If it's something that I'm thinking, oh, I want to do this, but should I? then if you want to do it, you should do it. Again, as long as it's like legal and morally, morally
Yeah.
okay. I honestly think that's the only option. I think you're right, and
Yes.
it sounds like almost insultingly simple, but like it's once you get into that mindset of like, yeah, I can do this or I can't do it. That's all it comes down to at the end of the day, no matter all these external factors, which are usually the stuff we make up in our heads of like how this could go wrong, how I could be perceived. At the end of the day, that hasn't happened yet. So like just go for it.
That's it's insultingly simple because there are so many more things that are insultingly simple than people imagine. We like to overcomplicate things. I know
Exactly.
we've talked privately, where I've encouraged you to watch that show, The Rehearsal, and to me that's the crux of the whole show. It's like, well, you have two options. You can run through literally the infinite possibilities of, if I do this and this person reacts this way and then I do that and this and that and this and that, or you can do it and there you go. You've done it. And you
Yeah.
go from there.
And this is coming from two chronic overthinkers as well. Like,
Oh yeah.
yeah. Well,
I
thank
do it
you.
professionally.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dylan, for coming on to. I mean, it's kind of your thing now is coming onto YouTube channels and testing a new series out to see if it works. And I hope that people enjoyed this. Please leave a comment down below if you've got all the way to the end and you enjoyed this video. Um, I should have said at the start, but you would have had my permission to watch it in parts. That's also okay. Um, Again,
I'm
check
so
out the
sorry.
Minx. Check out the Minx. Great band. Their latest album was fantastic, and I look forward to hearing more from them, but also more from Dylan and your creative mind. Because I've heard a lot of your sort of scraps of songs, and I think there's a lot of promise there, and I'm excited to see where they go. Um,
Thank you.
to all of you, thank you so much for listening. There will be another episode of this coming, I don't know how soon, but fairly soon. And for a little preview, it's with a friend of mine from university who has just started going into the film industry. So it'll be a bit of a pivot topically, but yeah, that'll be an interesting discussion as well. Thank you, as always, for watching, and hopefully we will catch you soon.